The story of our civilization, according to mainstream history and archaeology, goes something like this. Humans, as we know them today, first arrived on the scene about 300,000 years ago. For about 295,000 years, humans did nothing but hunt and gather. Then suddenly, about 5,000 years ago, they invent agriculture, cities, writing, monumental architecture, and everything else we associate with civilization. From there, it's supposed to be uninterrupted progress, a clean ascent from primitive to advanced. And as long as you don't question the sequence, it works. But when you start examining the details, you start noticing things that don't quite fit. Take the Sphinx in Egypt. Mainstream Egyptology tells us that it was carved around 2500 BC. But researchers like John Anthony West, Robert Schoch, and Graham Hancock have pointed out something strange about it. The enclosure, which is cut from the same limestone bedrock as the Sphinx itself, has erosion patterns that don't look like wind or sand. They look like the result of heavy, sustained rainfall. This is odd because the Sphinx sits on the edge of the Sahara Desert, one of the driest places on Earth for the last 5,000 years. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, argues that to see the amount of rain that would cause the kind of weathering we see on the Sphinx enclosure, you'd have to go back much further than 2500 BC. Several thousand years earlier, to the end of the last ice age 10,000 years ago. How did hunter-gatherer humans achieve this? Or was this done by a group that wasn't hunting and gathering? Then there's this clear difference in technology at some of these sites. Take Machu Picchu for example. Again, we have a pretty clean history from archaeology. It was built from scratch by the Inca sometime around 1450 AD. However, the architecture at Machu Picchu suggests that something a little more complex happened here. The lower stonework is fundamentally different from the upper levels. The simple logic here is that foundations come first. The lower levels are built before the higher levels. So why does the lower, older stonework look more sophisticated? These lower sections are built in a precise megalithic style. Massive stones cut so accurately they fit together without mortar. Higher up, the stonework is simpler. Smaller stones, rougher cuts, and these sections, the upper sections, needed mortar to hold it all together. So we're left with two possibilities. Either the Inca were capable of this extremely precise stonework and then for some reason decided to abandon it halfway through construction, or they arrived at a site where the megalithic foundations already existed, and they built on top of them using techniques we know they possessed. And we don't just see this in Peru. There are similar markers in Egypt. At Saqqara, there are these enormous granite boxes carved from single pieces of stone. Sharp right corners, precision cuts, mirror-like polish. Yet the hieroglyphs carved into these same boxes don't show anywhere near the same level of precision. So again, we're faced with a similar question. Did the Egyptians master extreme precision stoneworking and chose to carve in hieroglyphs with a less precise technique? Or did they inherit objects already cut and shaped, and they simply added their own markings later? Let's add another layer to this. Do you ever notice how some stories show up everywhere? The same story in different parts of the world that supposedly had no contact with each other in ancient times. For example, in ancient Sumerian myths, we hear of a figure called Oannes, who came out of the ocean with a group of disciples. He taught people how to build houses, record laws, and understand geometry. After dispensing civilization-building knowledge to the Sumerian people, Oannes leaves and fades into obscurity. We get a similar story out of Egypt. Osiris, with his own disciples, is said to have brought the gifts of civilization to the people of Egypt before leaving to bring these gifts to other nations. Now, one could say that Egypt and Sumeria, which is in Mesopotamia, were relatively close to each other, so the story could have been transferred amongst them. But the interesting thing is that we see the same story on the other side of the world in ancient Mesoamerica. In what is now Mexico, long before the Europeans arrived, people told of a figure called Quetzalcoatl. They said he and his own disciples came from across the sea and he brought knowledge with him. The skills and sciences to create civilized life. When his job was done, he left the same way he came. Farther south, the Maya encountered a very similar figure. They called him Kukulkan. Deep in the Andes Mountains, the Inca had their own version of a knowledge-bringing figure who came from the ocean with disciples before disappearing back into the water. He was known as Viracocha. Different continents, different names, same story. And one other peculiar detail about these stories is that all of these civilizing figures appeared in a time of chaos, after a great catastrophe. This is where the Younger Dryas comes into the picture. Around 12,900 years ago, the Earth was warming as it emerged from the last ice age. Then suddenly, that warming stopped. The planet plunged back into near glacial conditions. Climate systems collapsed. Weather patterns shifted dramatically. 1,200 years later, in 9700 BC, the Earth goes through another massive change. This time, an abrupt warming brings an end to the Younger Dryas, and, effectively, the last ice age. While the start and end of the Younger Dryas is still shrouded in mystery, it's the end of it that has a peculiar detail. It just so happens to line up almost exactly to when Plato tells us that Atlantis was destroyed and swallowed up by the sea. So you have the Younger Dryas that ends at 9700 BC, with a sudden warming which triggered a rise in sea levels that swallowed up an area of land comparable to entire modern nations. In Timaeus and Critias, Plato says that Atlantis was destroyed and swallowed up by the sea 9,000 years before Solon's visit to Egypt. And Solon is typically dated to approximately 600 BC. You put those two together, and you're at 9600 BC. Did the end of the Younger Dryas trigger the global flooding described in ancient myths? Was it the Cataclysm that sank Atlantis under the sea as Plato tells us? Was it the time of chaos during which civilizing figures appeared to the people of Egypt, Sumeria, and Mesoamerica? And if such encounters did occur, would there be anything in modern times to compare them to? During World War II, Allied soldiers landed on the small islands in the South Pacific. These were places that had never seen modern technology. The islanders watched the soldiers arrive with things that were unimaginable to them. They had radios, vehicles, canned food, metal tools, airplanes that dropped cargo from the sky. To these islanders, this must have looked like magic, or the work of a higher being. When the soldiers left, the islanders tried to recreate what they had witnessed. They built wooden airstrips, wooden rifles, they marched in formation, carved out crosses and other symbols, all in the attempt to get the sky gods to return with gifts. The most famous of these movements was the John Frum cargo cult. Presumably, one or several of the soldiers introduced themselves perhaps as John from America. The islanders remembered him as John Frum, the figure who came from afar and brought knowledge and abundance before disappearing. Sound familiar? So what are we looking at here? On their own, these are just isolated mysteries. But similar to a constellation, the image only appears once the points are connected. Ancient monuments that seem older than their official dates, stonework that suggests levels of precision we struggle to explain. myths from cultures across the world describing the same sequence: a great catastrophe, followed by figures who arrive from the sea and teach civilization. So are these myths just stories? Or are they memories? Did a global cataclysm bring an end to a high civilization at the end of the last ice age? Did fragments of that world survive, carrying knowledge into a broken landscape where humanity was starting over? And if that's the case, is what we call the beginning of civilization really a beginning at all? Or is it a re-emergence of something older? Subscribe for more content like this.